I'm going to be working on the side pass toward again, and at this point I'm going to start adding in another cue. So that was my cue there, just kind of lifting up my hand, and then I was going to go ahead and ask for the shoulder over and then the hindquarter like I have been doing. So I played with this for a while, and that's how I would start introducing another cue, is just putting it before my regular cue. But with that one, like that's the Mustang's cue to side pass toward me, and I was like, really, at this point, he's pretty good about side passing toward me just from that like hand cue at the shoulder, and he'll just kind of give me the whole side pass. So I was like, really, I can just keep it at that, because I don't really necessarily need just the shoulder over, because that's what I was. My whole goal with teaching shoulder over was to get side pass toward. So if I wanted like shoulder over for whatever reason and side pass toward, I could definitely want a different cue for that. But so that was what I ended up doing. But in this session, that's what I was planning on doing for a little bit, was teaching that new cue, and then I ended up not doing it for that reason. So we're gonna ask again here. So shoulder, he's either busy chewing or he's a little confused again. So we got a shoulder and then we got a hip right there. Nice. So I think he was just busy chewing there. But yeah, I need to stop asking him for so much at once. He's just not quite ready for that. So break it down a little bit more, give him some more slack, and in certain things. And then other things I need to ask for a little bit more. It's just kind of like balancing that. So that's definitely something I struggle with. So then sideways, that looks great. So he knows what it is after he does it a couple times. It's just that transitioning between one side or the other. So I think adding in another exercise in there or a little break would definitely help him out. I was just like, it was going really well, so I was too excited and was like, well, let's do it from the other side right away. So that was my problem there. That looks great. But yeah, even though we're having that like little bit of a hiccup there, I'm still really happy with where he's at. I'm not having to use the rope. I'm having to cue like the the shoulder and the hip separately a little bit, but there he kind of offered it, and I just kind of put him back. I don't really want that. You got to be really careful, especially with this lesson and the hip toward, that they don't just offer it and bump into you. And especially with a bigger horse, like he can bump into me and he's not going to do a whole lot of damage. You definitely don't want to reinforce that though. So we play with that for a little bit, and then now we're going to do some in-hand work, which I'd like to do a little bit of like in-hand dressage stuff with him, and that's kind of the goal. So we're going to start playing with that a little bit. So I've just clipped on like Dakota's reins. They're extremely long. See how he swung that hip over? That's not him being bad. That's what he just did was we worked on a ton of hip toward. I'm just going to ignore that, and I'm not going to reinforce that behavior in any way. So, and again, I could have probably worked a little bit harder on making sure he just stepped after a step or two, or he stopped after a step or two, stuff like that, and been a little bit more careful about it. And I definitely would have been if he was a full size horse, but I think I definitely cut him some slack since he was little. And he's round, so he doesn't really step on me, he just kind of bumps me, which that doesn't happen very often either. So, I mean, he did it twice in this lesson. He doesn't do it very much at all. So, it's not a huge deal, especially for him, but I do have to be careful with that, and you have to be very careful with a full-sized horse. And you'll see that with Dakota. Dakota really caught on really well to this, where she just goes and then she stops. The Mustangs did too. So for some reason, Sebastian just had a harder time, but I guess kind of depends on the horse. So I had him back up a few times there. That's something he's kind of sticky with, but he's doing a decent job there. I'm going to ask him to go forward. So again, we're relying on that forward cue that we worked on with the around the round pin and with lunging. So I've just clipped Dakota's reins onto his halter. Eventually I might get him like a little like lunging cavesson type situation, and I do want to get him like a stir single. But for right now we're just gonna kind of work on this. So asking him to go forward, and again just taking more steps before he stops. So this is one of those things that I don't need to cut him slack on, like I was earlier talking about the side pass toward. This one, like he knows the cues, he knows to go forward, he can go forward more. So this is one of those things that he's trained me to accept a little bit less here. So, and that's okay because we're still experimenting and figuring this out. So it's a journey to get it right for sure. So, and then I am occasionally reinforcing him for staying still because he doesn't anticipate a lot, but sometimes he will walk off. Not a whole lot though. So again, nice good forward cue here. And really, I'm just working on going forward and then stopping. So that's kind of, your main two things you kind of need before you even start steering. So that's what we're going to play with. And I probably could have used my target as well, because sometimes he has moments of like, oh, I forgot what walk on means, or it's just not that solid as I thought it was, and I probably should have had that target to help me out. And then, like here, he just wants to kind of stop and be like, okay, well, that's enough. That looked a lot better. Like after I re-cued him, he really took quite a few more steps forward. I don't want him to stop and be like, oh, is this good enough? And I don't want to have to re-cue him, but he did make a nice effort afterwards. So I do need to be careful of that. I do also get in the habit of re-cueing too many times, and that's going to dull that go forward cue, because it's like sometimes he goes forward and gets a treat and sometimes he doesn't, and it's just not that solid and it can be confusing. So I just don't want to wear that out. I want that to mean you go forward now. So I need to be a bit more prepared, have my target, you go forward now, and then in so many steps I'll reward you for it. So, and the other thing that I talked about a little bit was not letting him chew enough. So, two things with that. I think I'm feeding too big of a handful, and then I'm not letting him chew it all. And so once he has the food in his mouth, he's kind of like, I'm good. I don't really need to do anything else. My other horses aren't necessarily like that. They're like, oh, I'd like to do more and do more and do more. He's kind of like not as motivated. Especially when I'm using like Timothy hay pellets. I do have these like low carb treats that he does better with. So just either transitioning to just like literally 2 or 3 pellets, or the pieces of the low carb treats seem to work better. He's a little bit more motivated, and then he doesn't sit and chew for quite as long, because then I get kind of frustrated, like, okay, I want to hurry up and do this, and then I'm waiting for what feels like a long time waiting for him to chew. But I'm kind of creating that problem at the same time because I'm the one feeding him a little bit too much. So I want him kind of, for him, I want him seeking a little bit more. Most of my other horses, I want to give them a little bit bigger handful. I want to make them a little bit quieter and more relaxed. Him, I kind of want to wake him up a little bit more. He's kind of the exception to a lot of things. So we're going to do the same thing on the other side here. And he's kind of anticipating going forward, or maybe even moving the hips a little bit. He does back up quite nicely there. And probably could do a little bit less reinforcing for like standing still too. Um, that is going to depend definitely on the day too, and possibly even like the lesson I'm doing. But like for this particular lesson, like he didn't really want to go forward. He kind of takes some steps and then he'd stop. So I don't really need to reinforce the standstill that much, because even though I do want to work on that, like he's going to be reinforced more for that behavior, because that's more like intrinsically reinforcing for him. He'd rather stand still. Most of the time it's the opposite. Horses rather move forward, but for him it's not. So I do need to be careful of that. Is like here I'm doing a lot more feeding for standing still, and really like he kind of will just do that on his own. So I need to do a lot more for going forward and going forward further. See here, he gives me a couple of good steps, and then his last two are like, okay, that's all I can do. So I really definitely need to work on that, get the target out, maybe that little bit higher um, value food, and kind of get him cruising a little bit more here. Because see here, I'm having to re-cue a lot, and we don't want to do that too much.
Walk on.
He's walking on nicely to my cues. Like I should have my target just in case, but really like I could, like I want to hold it, but I didn't really necessarily need to use it.
Walk on.
But I do want to be able to have it in case I do. Okay, this looks much better walk, more steps, a little bit more movement there, a little bit faster, not so like sticking his feet and just dragging his feet along. Again, that looks better, and a nice stop there. That looks good too. So I think for him, we could definitely do like he stops and then he goes forward and then gets a treat for that, and so we can kind of add that together, so he's not doing a lot of being reinforced for stopping and standing still, since we do want to work on the forward.